Well, hello, friends. Welcome back. We are reading through the Bible in a year in 2023, and today we are in Genesis chapter 37 through 40. Um, this is a challenge. It's not. I don't think it's a challenge to do this much reading myself, um, but it's a challenge to try to. Definitely, it's too much that we can't. I can't just talk about the whole passage every day. So I'm just picking and choosing, not necessarily because it's the most important. Sometimes I might just share about things that stand out to me, things that maybe we've not talked about as much. So in today's reading, I'm actually going to talk, I think, mostly about the first two chapters, 37 and 38, and talk less about 39 and 40, which are probably more well known to us. As we go through the Old Testament, there's going to be certain stories that we're more familiar with, a lot of us. Now, maybe you're reading this, you're unfamiliar with the Bible completely, and that's great too. You're encountering these things for the first time. But for others, certain stories in the Bible and the Old Testament are more familiar to us. And there's always more depth that can be mined out. But I think the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife and going to prison and that is fairly well known to a lot. So if there's something in there that you want to talk about today, you're welcome to leave a comment, ask me about it, and I'd be happy to engage with that. But otherwise, I'm just going to talk about what I want to talk about. And again, I think this is obvious by now, but I'm not doing research day by day here. I'm not, combing through commentaries and trying to, figure this out. I am reading through the Bible as you're reading through the Bible. And I'm just kind of seeing how the things that I know that are connections already, the things that I'm thinking about, the things that I'm seeing that I hadn't seen before. And you're doing the same thing, just that we may be at different places in our reading journey. There's going to be places throughout this Bible reading that I'm going to have spent time in the past teaching and preaching on. So I'm going to have more familiarity with it. I'm going to have read books and things that have made connections that I'm going to now know, not because I'm a genius, but because I've read the insights of others, etc. So maybe you're ahead of me on some of these things. Maybe you've studied certain areas that I've not, and so you may know more than me about certain areas, and that's great. Feel free to share what you know. So I guess I just say that to maybe lower your expectations a little bit. I've not kind of studied and prepared a particular message for each of these. I'm just sharing some of my thoughts as I'm reading the Bible where I'm at. And I welcome you as you're doing that to share your thoughts, your questions, your experience. And so please do that. I want to know not just day by day, but tell me how your experience has been so far. We're only a little over a week in, so we're not that far in. But I want to hear about what your experience is, the thing when you're frustrated, when you're loving it, when you're seeing connections, when you're confused. Let me know those things. And I'm going to try to be honest about those things as well, too. There's going to be a lot of things that I don't understand, a lot of things that I find confusing still. And there's, honestly, I think I've said this before, but there's some parts of the Bible that are just really hard to figure out. Thankfully, most of the time, they're not the big pieces of the narrative. They're kind of some things that are, they're not unimportant, but they may not be part of the central storyline as significantly. And so we can, I think there's certain things that we can kind of set aside and say, I want to come back to this because I don't understand it. I feel like I should. But our reading schedule is such that we can't get stuck. We can't just stay and go word by word and verse by verse because there's too much. There's too many chapters per day. And this project is not designed for that. There absolutely is a time and a place to focus in on a word through Scripture, a theme through Scripture, a book of the Bible, a section of it. Absolutely. Let's do that. You can even do that this year. But this project is a read through the Bible. And that keeps us at a pace that prevents us from slowing down too much. that being said, you can, of course, grab some things to reflect on it yourself, sort of as you go. So in today's reading, in chapter 37, we are jumping into Joseph's story, which takes up most of the rest of the book of Genesis at the end of the week, right? Yeah, on Saturday, we're going to wrap up Genesis 2 weeks worth. It's a long kind of foundational book. And then next week we'll be in Exodus for the next 2 weeks. So how that works out, 2 weeks in Genesis, 2 weeks in Exodus, and we'll kind of see where we go from there. A little bit less in Leviticus and then Numbers. Leviticus and Numbers is going to be interesting because that's where we get slowed down a lot of times in our reading. So we're going to plow through and we're going to have some fun with the places that we get held up sometimes. So we'll see what happens there. So we're introduced to Joseph. And again, a lot of this is familiar to a lot of us. I don't necessarily assume that. So we know, right, that Jacob has these 12 children that will become the 12 tribes of Israel. Something interesting happens with Joseph, where he ultimately doesn't become known as a tribe himself, but his two sons become two half tribes. So we'll get to that in Genesis still here today. So let's look a little bit at 37, chapter 37, Genesis. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. So remember, Canaan is the promised land, or good part of it, right? But they live in it now, but they don't have kind of possession the way that they will later on. This is the account of Jacob's family line. So interesting in verse 2. So when we get to chapter 38 today, hopefully you've read it already, or you will. We get to chapter 38. It's got nothing really directly to do with Joseph, which is interesting. And so this really isn't just about Joseph. This is about this family. Now, a lot of it focuses in on Joseph, but on the tail end of Joseph's story, a lot is going to be done with his brothers again. So the Bible is not just stories of individual people of faith or people of failure. It's a bigger story than that, about this one big family that becomes this nation of these tribes that God is working through, remember, to bring blessing to the world. So big picture stuff. So this, we're told in introduction by the author here of Genesis chapter 2, this is the account of Jacob's family line, not just Joseph, even though a lot of it's about Joseph. Okay. So Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers. You notice almost everybody's a shepherd. That's kind of the thing. They had these animals. That was their livelihood. That was their food. That was their income. That was a lot of things. And so a lot of people are shepherds. That's just kind of how it works. So Joseph, he's 17. So that ought to tell us something. Teenagers, we know about teenagers, and Joseph is not going to disappoint us as far as how teenagers operate. Joseph is kind of like a typical, although there certainly are exceptions, right? It seems to me, at least, somewhat immature person in the way that he kind of goes about things, but you can judge for yourself, you're right, based on the narrative that we are kind of reading here today. So let me know what you think about Joseph as we go along here as well. Joseph, a young man of 17, is tending the flocks with his brothers. They're half brothers, right? They're all have the father Jacob, but there's different parents. There's the two wives of Jacob, Leah and Rachel, and then each one of them has a servant who Jacob has children with as well, which we've seen in the reading already, right? With his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. Sometimes they're called wives. Sometimes I think they're called servants or maybe concubines. I can't remember, different words used, but it's a little bit of a different relationship, but some of the same, but it's all a mess, right? His father's wives and he, Joseph, brought their father a bad report about them. So this, I'm thinking here, tattletale, right? Now, maybe they did something that was really terrible that it was worth him telling them. I'm just kind of feeling this vibe of Joseph just kind of being immature myself and kind of tattletale on them. We see kids doing this all the time. Sometimes adults doing this at work. We'll just kind of see kind of where we're at, right? Now look at verse 3. Now Israel Interesting. Now, this is a person. Who's Israel? Do you remember? Israel is Jacob. Remember last time in this wrestling match with Jacob and this man whom he identifies with the Lord later, says your name will no longer be Jacob but Israel, because you've wrestled with God and man and have prevailed. So sometimes he's called Jacob, sometimes he's called Israel. It's the same person. Because he'll be his kids will be in their clan, their family, their tribes will be the nations of the nation of Israel, the tribes. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Oh, Jacob, what are you doing? He loves Rachel more than he loved Leah, right? And he makes no qualms about it, about the sort of level of his affection. So it's really fascinating. This to us is just such I mean, whoa, you don't touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? Having a favorite or something like that. It's kind of crazy. So, hey, Charlie, thanks for joining us. Charlie's recovering from a knee replacement. So I guess you don't got much to do besides sit and watch me talk, or watch TV. So it's good to have you with us here today. And, for the journey. So now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. So he gives a reason here for it in any case that that's the case. Oh, Judd, what are you doing to me? What are you doing to me? Are you jumping ahead on me? Genesis 37, Joseph tells his brothers that one day they will bow down to him, including Judah. Verse 26, and they tried to change the plan. Okay. Genesis 38 says that to Judah, let me teach you about my plans according to a plan in which the younger brother supplants the older. Hey, when does that happen, right? The younger brother supplants the older. This is the really fascinating theme of the firstborn, and then God not choosing the firstborn or kind of making somebody else in the place of the firstborn. But yeah, I mean, really good point about trying to change the plan. Are they trying to? Yeah, I mean, I guess, right? They're trying to get rid of him. I mean, that's where we're at. Well, let's keep going a little bit, and we'll see this in a second, and we'll jump in with your thoughts there. So Israel loved Joseph more. He had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. I don't think that word ornate has. You can go on a tangent on that and try to figure out what that word means. But in any case, he gives Joseph this special garment that nobody else has. Right? It's fancier. It's more valuable. It's whatever. In this case. And so verse 4, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So even before the dreams from God about the others, bowing down to him, etc., even before that, the context is not great between Joseph and his brothers at this time, partially maybe because of the way Joseph, we saw him kind of telling on them, partially because of Jacob, father, and he's kind of setting things up for problems in the way that he's showing this special treatment to Joseph. Maybe not, but that's kind of what seems to me on the surface here. So the dream. Joseph, verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So they hated him to start with, and now as a result of this, he's hating them more. Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of the dream and what he had said. So, I mean, the dream is the dream. It is what it is. And I guess the point of wrestling here is, was Joseph unwise to tell them the dream? I don't know. Maybe they needed to know, but in the context of what it was, it didn't do anything but increase the hostility in that particular case. Pam says, I found Joseph's story interesting in so many ways, starting with his stand in his father's eyes and the impression the father's love had on the brothers. Yeah, this is really, I think we can see this generational thing too, right? With like Rebecca going really over the top to make sure that Jacob got the blessing and the deception that was associated with that. We see clear favorites, and Isaac had Esau. He was his favorite. Like they each picked favorites, and I would think that maybe Jacob would have learned from that and not repeated that. But these family things tend to repeat themselves, right? If we don't kind of put a stop to it, that generational kind of stuff, it's powerful for good or for ill. I think sort of either way. So they hate him all the more. It says, verse 9, and then he had another dream. He told his brothers, listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. Wow, it sounds a lot like the last dream, except for different images, right? So look at verse 10. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this matter in mind. I'm not sure what that phrase would maybe mean in Hebrew. It'd be a good thing to kind of dig deeper into that. So you'll see sometimes I'll kind of tag those things and say, this is particularly interesting to me. I'd want to kind of pursue that some more. So what do these words or phrases mean? And one of the best ways to sort of get an idea of the range of how it can be used is to see how else the word is used throughout the Bible, particularly maybe throughout Genesis, throughout the Old Testament, throughout the whole Bible. How is a word or phrase used? And that sort of gives us an idea. So Jacob is not a big fan of the dreams either, because it's sort of like he's sort of saying like, hey, are you above me? The father, the patriarch. So no one's happy. The brothers are jealous, but his father, I don't know, kept the matter in mind. What are other translations say maybe to it that would be sort of interesting? Is he kind of thinking about it like, is there something to this? Even though I don't like it. Because we're told, right, that he rebuked it. So what do you guys think? Is Joseph is he off track by bringing up these dreams? Should he have told them? Should he have kept them to himself? Because we're just told he had the dream. In the dream, he wasn't told, hey, tell people this. He wasn't told, don't tell people this. Was Joseph unwise in his youth? Should he have done that? Should he have, went to his father and say, hey, I don't know what this means. Can you help me? I don't know. It doesn't say. It only says sort of what it says here. So reminds me of when Mary pondered these things. That's interesting. So I wonder if, do you guys know about the Septuagint? So what the Septuagint is the Old Testament translated into Greek, like the New Testament is, same Greek language, which it has its shortcomings, but it has the advantage of seeing how people in the general time frame might have translated Hebrew into Greek. And so it would be fascinating if there was similar word use here in Mary's statement, or Luke's statement, I guess, about Mary in that case, and in this occurrence here. So chasing down those things is fun. Sometimes the bell rings and it's the same thing, and you're like, wow, it's cool. Sometimes it's different, and you're like, oh, okay, whatever. But it still is interesting stuff, right? He was sharing his truths, not knowing what it meant at the time. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting stuff. So the brothers. So let's talk about the brothers, what they do to him a little bit. I just want to talk about Judah and Tamar a little bit. And then, man, Time flies when you're having fun, right? Now, chapter 37, still verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Hey, go get your brothers. Let me move along." He finds the guy. He says they went that way. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them. Verse 18. Okay, let's jump back in here. But when they saw him at a distance, it's fascinating because this reminds me again of Esau and Jacob, and it reminds me of the parable of the prodigal son. This language, and again, I'm not sure if it's the same original language used or not, but it may well be. When they saw him at a distance, instead of like Esau welcoming Jacob, or like the father welcoming his son, the prodigal son, in this case, they see him at a distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. They plotted to kill him. So maybe we have some similar language, but then opposite intention, right? In some other instance. Verse 9. Verse 19. Here comes the dreamer, that dreamer, they said. So this is kind of condescending, I think, right? It's definitely not positive. They said to each other, "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." So, I mean, they're pretty immature too. Like, this is kind of like, yeah, I get it. Like, it's no fun this guy's precocious. Maybe it's no fun having him be dad's favorite, but like, let's kill him. That's pretty serious stuff, right? Then we'll see what comes of this dreamer. So, yeah, again, feel free to jump in with your thoughts, questions, comments, etc. here along the way. Verse 21, when Reuben heard this. Now, this is interesting, Reuben. So why Reuben? Reuben is not, he doesn't share a mother with Joseph. Reuben is Leah's son. So there's not that proximity. But what is Reuben? Reuben is the firstborn. And the firstborn, we've seen that God's kind of upending that in certain frequent senses. But as a general rule, the firstborn was, the oldest, right? Sometimes we get responsible just from being older, but also has responsibility in an extra measure. So maybe that's going on here. It doesn't specifically say, but Reuben is the firstborn. And Reuben's the one in this case who is more responsible, right? Or cares more. When Reuben heard this, 21, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness." You guys know what a cistern is? Sometimes we think of a well. It's not a well. A well has water that comes up into it. A cistern is something that holds rainwater. And they were all over the Middle East. You can see them still remaining all over Israel today. Some were huge, some were smaller. But when it rained, half of the year it would collect water, and the other half of the year, and then when it didn't, they would drink from it. So this cistern's empty, but it's big, and they had high walls and stuff like that. So that's a cistern. All right, Judd. Yeah, it's nice to have somebody who can pull up other stuff while I'm talking, right? Genesis 31:11. The LXX is the abbreviation for the Septuagint that I was talking about, if you guys aren't familiar with that. Genesis 37:11 and Septuagint and Luke are different wording. I know, you're way past this already. No, that's good. You saved us some time with that. So interesting. Yeah. So be careful not to make too much of some things, but it's fun to chase those things down. And even when the wording's different, doesn't necessarily mean that there's no connection. Just want to be careful, right? So thanks, Judd, for doing that. Appreciate that. Okay, verse 22. Don't shed any blood. Remember back after the flood, now we have kind of instituted, because of how serious it is for people made in the image of God, having the breath of God in them, that to take a life, you're sort of are potentially forfeiting your life, right? So there's already, we don't have the law yet, and all its kind of detail and depth, but we have this prohibition, right? That it should be known how well it was carried on, the teaching, who knows? But to take a life is a serious thing, and for whatever reason, Reuben's don't shed any blood, throw him in the cistern in the wilderness, which, I mean, the chances of him dying there are also pretty high, right? In the wilderness, in the cistern that he can't get out of. So is that like a passive aggressive way of murder? I mean, I don't know. But for them, but he has a plan as far as what his brothers would think. They were maybe getting rid of him without physically, killing him or something like that. But we know, and we're told, that Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So he's working a plan around his brother's kind of craziness. Verse 23, so Joseph came to his brothers. They stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing, right? The one dad gave him, the one that represents him being the favorite. And they threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. I already mentioned that. As they sat down to eat their meal, so they ripped off this thing. They throw him in the cistern. They're sitting there having a picnic with Joseph in there, I'm sure screaming, right, at him, let me out of here. What are you guys doing? That kind of stuff. They looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. Okay, so now we know the history. We know who Ishmael is, right? Isaac's half brother, kind of in that. His family line coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, for they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, okay, one of the brothers stepping forward, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And the brothers agreed. So the Midianite merchants come by, they pull up Joseph, they sell him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And then we will pick back up tomorrow. We're not going to cover, today's reading is the first part of the story. We're not going to talk a lot about Joseph in Egypt today. We'll pick back up and talk primarily about that tomorrow. Ooh, it's been a long time already. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes, right? That was what they would do when they were mourning, repentant, etc., that kind of thing. He went, so he's going back to rescue him. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Then they got Joseph's robe. The brothers slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in his blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, we saw this. So there's a cover-up here going on, right? Examine it to see whether it is your sons. You recognize it. Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters, the ones who did this, came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. So Jacob's not interested in getting better for this. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, Joseph's and Potiphar. All right. I mean, that's almost half an hour, right? Whew. Time flies. Kind of want to talk about Judah and Tamar. I don't want to go any longer, though. I think half an hour is enough. But feel free to share any thoughts or questions you have about Judah and Tamar. It's really an interesting story. It sets up some other things that are going to be going on, and it sets up something about Jesus, which is really fun too. So read this story. Here's your homework. I got homework for the first time ever. So read Genesis chapter 38 if you haven't already. And then find the two genealogies in the Gospels, okay? Am I even going to tell you? Do you know where they are? Which two gospels have genealogies of Jesus? They're in the beginning of these two gospels. It's Matthew and Luke. So here's your homework. Go to Luke first. Go to Luke's genealogy first, in chapter 3, I believe, and find out how that connects to this story, and then go to Matthew in Matthew chapter 1, and it will be even more obvious. But I want you to see how the more that we understand of the Bible and the biblical story, the more that we'll understand the Bible and the biblical story, but the more we'll also understand the parts that we kind of think don't seem that interesting or don't seem that significant, like genealogies. So we'll start to see, as we build this out, how the story comes together and how these, what might just be a name and a genealogy, if we expand it out, has this whole story behind it. And we'll see how God is at work in the messiness of these situations and the kind of people that become part of the story. It's really interesting stuff. So if you have a chance to do that, so that we can start to see some of these connections, turn on those genealogies and kind of let me know what you think. Thanks, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.